In 2011, a Half-Life 2 mod came out called the Stanley Parable. While the mod itself didn't receive massive attention, the standalone title released in 2013 certainly did. And if you're around on the internet at all during that time, you know what I'm talking about. With the game being such a hit that in April of 2022, they re-released it with a shiny coat of paint. Buckets. In October of 2015, Davey Wheaton, creator of the Stanley Parable, released his second major title, The Beginner's Guide. The game draws many parallels to his previous work, while also managing to feel completely different. For starters, this game has basically no replay value. The Beginner's Guide tells its linear narrative in an experience that lasts about an hour and a half. Being a big fan of the Stanley Parable, I've known about this game since 2018, at the time watching Let's Plays, and for some reason, the game never really left my head after having seen it. Recently, however, I started strongly thinking of it again, and was about to watch another playthrough when I decided to actually sit down and play it myself. With the game turning 10 this year, and with Davey's new game Wonderstop around the corner, I figured there's no better time to re-examine this gem than now. That said, I'd like to issue a full spoiler warning, as I will be discussing the game in its entirety. If at any point you think to yourself, hey, this looks interesting, please feel free to stop the video and play this for yourself. It's a 90-minute experience, so I think you won't regret. Upon launching the game, you are immediately greeted by your narrator, who happens to be the game's creator himself. The game drops you into a custom Counter-Strike map while Davey explains what this game is. The basic premise of the game is Davey taking on a tour through an assortment of random games created by his friend Coda, as a way to spread what inspired Davey to make games. The general formula will involve loading into a game with the year it was made and attached, and you going through it while Davey shares his thoughts on the game. Rinse and repeat until you've seen all of Coda's games, and Davey has successfully shone a spotlight on what he wants the world to see. Something worth noting is the trailer of this game asks the viewer if by looking at someone's work they could figure out the person behind. This is a crucial thing to remember to fully grasp this game, so try to keep it in mind throughout. Or don't. I'll mention this again later when it becomes relevant, much later. The first game we play is, in Davey's words,
"This game is called Escape from Whisper, and it's one of the more generic games you'll see from Coda. It kinda looks like this game was abandoned mid-development. For instance, you have this gun, which you'd think would indicate that there are supposed to be monsters or enemies somewhere, but then clearly there are no enemies anywhere. You can't even reload the gun when you run out of bullets. But ultimately we don't really know. Maybe Coda thought that actually it was complete the way that it is. And I think that we should talk about his games for what they are, rather than for what they're not."
After a bit of exploration, you come across a labyrinth. While nothing out of the ordinary about the maze itself, it's Davey's reaction to it that starts to give us a bit of insight into our narrator, rather than the developer.
"Apparently this space station has a labyrinth on it. Sure, I don't know. There's really no reason for it that I've ever been able to discern, so in the interest of time, I'm just gonna skip you on past it. Or, if you'd really like to solve the labyrinth, you're welcome to do that too."
You can, if you want to, like me, go back and attempt the labyrinth, but just in case you were curious, no, you don't get anything for doing it, other than a sense of completion. Whatever you choose to do, once you proceed, you get the game's narrative and ending. And I think it's best I just show this first. I'll refrain from giving my own thoughts until the end once everything's laid out. But keep this in mind, or don't. The game will remind you of this later, so I won't have to.
Okay, this is the part that's interesting. The game has this narrative about the whisper machine and how it has to be turned off, and then you get to the engine room.
"It's so much to ask, but for all of our lives, would you do it? Could you give yourself?"
Let me pause here for a second. What you just experienced, stepping into the beam and then dying, is probably what Coda had initially intended when he was developing this level. But when he first compiles and plays it, something goes wrong. There's a bug somewhere, and this is what happens instead. the beam causes you to start floating. And this is an important moment for him. Because yes, this is technically a glitch, but Coda identifies something human about it, like how small it makes you feel in the face of this larger chaotic system. Or this floating could be the afterlife, a peaceful place, juxtaposed against all of the hysteria that you've just had to traverse. I don't even know. I have no idea what he was thinking, but what's clear is that after making this, something lodges itself in his brain. He wants to do more of these really weird and experimental designs. So he stops work on this and moves on to a stream of tiny little games that go in all sorts of directions.
The next game is a simple enough premise where you can only walk backwards. I don't have much to say about it yet, and neither does Davey, so in the interest of time I'll be skipping this segment.
Once you've been slowed to an absolute crawl, the door at the top of the stairs opens. So why, if Coda's not showing these games to anyone, why bother opening the door at all? Well, to show you, I'm modifying the game here so that when you press enter, it'll bring you back up to full speed so you can enter the door for yourself.
Yes, you can go up these stairs at reduced pace. You won't be slowed to a halt. No, you don't get anything for it. I value your time more than mine, so I'll jump to when I get to the top. I forgot that's what was here.
A room that's warm and nice and filled with little ideas for games. Coda would often tell me that he didn't mind if people thought of him as cold or distant. He said that he knew that he was actually a vibrant and compassionate person, but that it takes time to really see that. It can be a very slow climb to get there.
The next game is one puzzle and a little twist. The puzzle is important, so I will show it, and then jump to the end. As other than those two things, you're just going from point A to point B.
Well, this is new for Coda. It's an actual puzzle. Go ahead and see if you can solve it.
I'm sorry. I know the answer. Oh well.
Don't forget that solution, because we're going to see this puzzle again soon. We're going to see it a lot. So that seems to be it, right? You walk down a corridor, you solve a puzzle, you get to the end. Simple enough. Alright, now I'm going to modify the game again, so that when you press enter, it'll remove all of the walls from this room.
I wonder if that's where the 3 gigabytes come from.
How about that? There was more to it than we had any way of knowing. I actually find it funny that this game comes after the Stairs game, since they essentially convey the opposite idea. So, in the Stairs game, a dull exterior concealed a rich interior. And then, in this level, a dull interior hides this fantastic outer world. Either way, I think that the point is the same, is that most of the time you don't get to know what you're missing, or even that you're missing anything. That's not your role as a player. So if your role here is not to understand, then what is it?
Gotta stay consistent, you know?
This prison, funny enough, in Coda's original design, the door stayed shut for a full hour before letting you go. If you don't mind, I think we're gonna skip that.
I know I said that I'll bring the full picture at the end, and I will, But there is an irony in Davy skipping past waiting an hour when his earlier title literally had an achievement that requires you wait 5 years. Just some food for thought and something I thought was a bit funny.
This is something that he and I used to argue about a lot. You know, whether a game ought to actually be playable, whether it means anything if no one can get through it. And I would always defend that, you know, all this work goes into the game, why not make it playable and accessible? And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or two later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. Believe me, I played every single one of those just to find out if there was like a gag hidden somewhere. There wasn't.
What Davy says after about playable games is our first major look into the difference between Davy and Coda. And while it is a simple debate, this one piece of dialogue speaks volumes regarding things we'll see later. Once again, please bear with me, I don't want to spoil things too soon if you haven't played or seen this before. The dialogue in this game is about the only agency you actually have. This is why I originally saw no reason in playing this. But it is also ironically the reason I ended up being so glad that I did. I'll be jumping through the next few games, so please just enjoy this montage. I'll be back at the end to finally give my thoughts on everything.
It's a lamppost. Okay, I can't tell you quite why, but for some reason Coda fixates on this lamppost. It's going to appear at the end of every single one of his games from here on out. I'll tell you what I think. I think that up to this point, you know, he's been making really strange and abstract games with no clear purpose, and maybe you can only float around in that headspace for so long. Because now he wants something to hold on to. He wants a reference point. He wants the work to be leading to something. He wants a destination, which is what this lamppost is. It's a destination. We're going to see it in the work as well. His games are just going to become a lot more cohesive, a lot more fully developed, with more of a clear idea behind them. And as we go, that idea will get clearer and clearer and clearer. So first off, I'm sure you can deduce this, but this game is not connected to the internet. All of the notes that you're going to see have been written by Coda. This was actually the first game of his that I ever played. This was shortly after I met him at a weekend game jam in Sacramento, where I grew up. I saw him working on this very level, and it was just so different from anything that anyone else was doing. So right away I was like, I have to be friends with this person. In retrospect, I think I was probably a bit too pushy, trying to get his attention. I was over-enthusiastic. But he was very gracious about it and very patient with me. And I cooled off eventually. Oh, feel free to skip over any of these notes if they're not doing anything for you. Nothing extra is going to happen if you read all of them. Either way, to me they convey a sense of loneliness. I see this person who's filled with thoughts and feelings and beliefs and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played. But it's ironic, isn't it, that in playing this game and seeing how alone Coda often felt, that we get to know him better and actually kind of connect with him. And I have to be honest with you, this idea is really seductive to me. That I could just play someone's game and see the voices in their head and get to know them better and have to do less of the messy in-person socializing. I could just get to know you through your work. I think this is why I always liked Coda's games so much, is because it felt like they let me have that connection. I felt as though he was inviting me personally into his world. And then I feel less lonely too. At the end of this level, we're going to see the puzzle again. And here, I'll tell you what I think the puzzle means. Each of these games represents an idea that was on Coda's mind at the time that he was making it. And the puzzle is a way of closing the door on a previous chapter of his life before moving on to the next one. In each of his games, after exploring a theme that, he might find difficult, Goetze can then place this puzzle that he knows has a reliable solution, he understands exactly how it works, and so it gives him a simple mechanism for moving on. And because there's this dark area between the doors, a space between spaces, before you move on, you get to pause. Just for a moment, a few seconds to reflect on and let go of the events that led you here. To step back and connect the pieces together. To grasp at that elusive bigger picture. Okay, this one is tough. It's gonna kinda just spin its own wheels for a few minutes. Hang with it. See, this is it, the whole game, and there's nothing that's particularly interesting about it. You just walk to the end of a hallway. Except, for some reason, Goetze gets really fixated on this prison that has all of this modern furniture. And I don't know why, but he decides he needs to revisit this prison. He's gonna start over, use the same assets, turn it into something else. Okay, cool, here's version 2. And that's it. He's done. He stops making prisons. This is the very last version of the prison game that he created. And the reason I think it works is that the prison is not actually in it. After the intense set of prison games, this house cleaning level almost feels like cleansing. It's the moment after a particularly difficult or traumatic experience where you just need to let it sit and digest inside of you, and eventually cohere into something meaningful. I know that Goetze really liked this game. Of all of his work, actually, this was the only one that he called me up to ask me to come over and look at it. This was during a period of a few months where he was grossly happy all the time, just walked around with a constant smile on his face. I'm glad he made this. I'm glad he found some peace. But, of course, it can't last. The music stops, your companion is gone, it's time to leave. The door at the top of the hill is now open as well. Again, you can't stay in the dark space for too long. You just can't. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive. I fell pretty hard for this one. I feel like it's one of the most relatable experiences that you can have. To assume that some other person is perfect and totally fulfilled in every way, and completely miss all of the little flaws that make them painfully human. I think about this game a lot these days. This one took a lot longer than all the others for Coda to make. It was 4 months between this and the last one. That's twice as long as it took him to make any other game before this, and it's not like it's particularly complex, so I remember I found that a little strange at the time.
Okay, just gonna pause here for a second. Remember that trailer I mentioned? This is actually the first game shown in it. It looks pretty different here, and I'll bring up a theory for this later. I know I'm accumulating a lot of conclusions, but it is important that I don't spoil things before they come up.
The game ends with this eerie premonition of what's going to happen next in Coda's life. The solution to social anxiety, to fears of having to perform and having to chase success, the answer for Coda is to withdraw, to hide himself away. Which is what leads to scenarios like the stairs that slowed you down several games ago, where it just becomes harder and harder to access Coda's inner landscape because he keeps retreating. He just keeps backing away from possible connections to anyone other than himself. And to be honest, I didn't consider it very healthy when I first played this game. You know, it looked to me like he was trying to justify the idea of just disconnecting yourself from the world. And that wasn't what I wanted for him or for his games. Because I feel like a lot of his games are inviting me to connect with this person, to bring him closer. But what can you do? After this, Coda went off and took another 5 months to make a new game. Like I said, I was getting concerned. First off, he's never been this explicit in his work about exactly what he's thinking. So where's that coming from? But then even weirder, his work has potentially stopped being an outlet for him. Not like he's having trouble iterating on ideas, but he literally just can't think of new ideas anymore. And in person, he was being a lot more distant than usual. Like, you know how sometimes a person will just deflect anything that you say in order to keep themselves disconnected all the time? It was that kind of thing. Here was the point in my relationship with Coda where I really started to wonder if he needed my help in some way. His games are going to get more desperate from here on out. After this game, it's almost 6 months before he finishes something new. If the last game featured Coda talking explicitly about his creative frustrations, this one turns it up to 11. Now, put yourself in my shoes playing this. Here's a friend whose work is exhibiting signs of struggle, frustration, anxiety, depression, even. And yet still, he keeps making games. He keeps throwing himself into the grinder even when he clearly doesn't have the energy for it anymore. Why? What is it for? Because from my perspective at the time, and just what I knew of him, this was a result of how isolated he was. He was in his own little bubble, just sitting at his computer all day, not really showing these games to anyone, not releasing them onto the internet, and so he didn't have anyone outside of himself to connect with. He had no outlet to ground himself on. You can't talk yourself out of loneliness. It doesn't work that way. You can't be the one writing both the questions and the answers. Then there's no movement. Then there's no circulation. If all of your anxieties are being channeled into your work, then if the work ever fails, you have no backup and you're just going to crash. Seeing this game at the time that he made it looked really unhealthy to me. I was watching him do this to himself, and I hated it. I hated seeing him so trapped. It's like, video games are not worth this amount of suffering. This is someone I really cared about, and I used to get so much joy out of seeing him create. For him to suddenly become angry and frustrated like this, it was the worst thing for me. I don't know. This is what I felt at the time. I don't know how else to explain it. I wanted it to stop more than anything. I had never felt so rotten. I needed more than I had ever needed anything for this to stop. But it didn't stop. After finishing this one, Coda takes another 7 months and comes up with a new game. And of course, it's the machine.
Oh, right. Oh.
So now the work is becoming self-destructive. And I'll tell you, at the time that I first played this game, shortly after he made it, here's what I'm thinking to myself. I'm thinking that Code is stuck in his own head, and that it's having a very negative effect on him, and that all he needs to do is just start showing his work to people, to get some actual feedback on his games. It might get him out of isolation. And so, as I'm thinking this, I realize that I could be the one to initiate it. Because it would never occur to Coda to start actively soliciting feedback, so what if I did it for him? If he could see the difference it would make to have more actual conversations with other human beings, would that bring him out of his mental spiral? Would it give him confidence in himself? Would it bring meaning back into his work? So I started showing Coda's work to people. I took this one, and the islands which you just played, the theater, the notes, the house cleaning game, and some of the prison escape games. I brought them to people that I knew and trusted. I asked their opinions. And the great part is that they really loved his games. You know, the point of it all was just to give him some external reference point, but they genuinely loved his work. There was nothing for him to be afraid of. Can you see why I felt like this was the right thing to do? Because it's the thing that I always feel like I need, to be told that my work is good, that I am good. When someone really connects with a thing that I've made, when they see themselves purely in my work, there's nothing that feels better. And I got to give that very same feeling to my friend. I did something, I really felt like I'd done something good, like I was a good person. I felt like there was a friend who was in trouble and was unhappy and maybe didn't like themselves, and I could fix it. If I could give him this gift, maybe I could fix the problem. When they told me how much they enjoyed his games, it was the best feeling. It was the absolute best feeling. It made me feel so happy, so beautifully, beautifully happy. So anyway, Coda finishes this game, and then really he just kind of takes off for a while. So this is June of 2011, and I didn't hear anything from him for several weeks, I guess. And so out of nowhere, one day I get an email, and it's got a private link to a new game of Coda's. This one is called The Tower, and to my knowledge, it's the last game that Coda ever made. So let's take a look. And this is where I have trouble saying anything meaningful about Coda's work. Because more than anything else, the tower just feels distant. It feels like it's trying to distance itself from the world. It's a very cold game. This room actually has a maze in it. Except that all the walls of the maze are invisible. And then every time you touch one of the walls, there's this awful flashing and noise, so the experience is really miserable. The game goes beyond not being meant to be played, it actually seems to despise the player for trying to play it at all. But I do want to show you the rest of the levels, so when you're ready to continue, press enter and I'll put a bridge over the maze. And to be fair, it's not like this is the first game that's needed some modification to be playable. Like the house cleaning game. You know, that one used to actually loop the cleaning chores and you just cleaned a house forever. I had to cut it off so that you could exit the house and the game would actually end. But that game had an idea that it was actually trying to communicate. What's the deeper idea behind the invisible maze? The only way past this challenge is to randomly guess the 6-digit code. Like the invisible maze, it's frustrating to me, because it's the opposite of everything else that Coda has made. It doesn't encourage thought or engagement. It doesn't ask anything of me, except a lot of my time. If I could have reached him during this time, then maybe I could have asked him, but I couldn't have. I still don't really understand why this is here. I'll put the code on the ground for you here, though, so that we can move on. The switch to open this door is actually on the other side of the door, meaning that it's literally impossible to solve from this side. So even if you somehow brute forced your way through the first 2 challenges, and you got to this point, there's actually just no way to progress. And it's scary for me, the idea of Coda cutting himself off entirely, just saying, you know, that's it, that's the end of the conversation, not giving me any way to fix the problem. I feel like a failure, I guess, when I can't fix the problem. But I can open this door for you, so let me do that. Was I a failure for not understanding this game? I mean, I don't know why I would be. It's not like everything needs to have a solution, but I feel it somehow. I feel like I failed, and I don't understand why. I remember, it's June of 2011. I'm playing this for the very first time, and as I'm playing, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know this person. I have no idea who this person is. It wasn't the guy I knew, it wasn't my friend. I had come to so many conclusions from looking at all of his work up to this point, and then suddenly none of them... I had been trying to, though. That was the thing. For years I was trying to get to know him, to understand who he actually was and what he stood for. I asked him so many times to please just tell me what his games mean to him. I asked him please to tell me what the 3 dots mean. And he wouldn't. I just felt so strongly that if I could have connected with him, that if I could have somehow made his work my own, that I would finally be once and for all happy. It was that I needed to see myself in someone else. I needed to be someone other than me. But he stopped and left, and it felt somehow like I had failed. Where did I screw up? I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? It's because of what I did. I poisoned it for you. I don't think I ever told you this, but when I took your work and I was showing it to people, it actually felt... it felt as though I were responsible for something important and valuable. And the people who played them, they treated me like I was important. They really listened and cared about what I had to say. Even though I was showing your work, I felt good about myself. Finally. For a moment, while I had that, I liked myself. And then you stopped, and I didn't have anything left to show people. I just had to be with myself. And as soon as that happened, there was no feeling at all. Nothing. Less than nothing. What does that mean? I'm afraid that I did something really stupid because I don't like myself. That's why I'm releasing this collection of your work, is because I haven't been able to find any other way to reach you. I've tried everything. And so a part of me has hope that if I put this compilation out into the world, and if I put my name on it, that maybe enough people will play it so that it'll find its way to you, so that I can tell you that I'm sorry. I know I screwed up. If I apologize to you truly and deeply, will you start making games again? Please, I need to feel okay with myself again. And I always felt okay as long as I had your work to see myself in. I mean, is something wrong with me? Because I know that I did an awful thing, and I'm doing it again right now. Like, I'm showing people your work, but I can't stop myself from doing it. That's how badly I need to feel something again, like I'm an addict. There has to be something wrong with me. Can I apologize? What if I tell you I was wrong? Will that work? Will that fix it? I don't know. I don't think it will, but there's nothing else that I can do. Just tell me what you want. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, start making games again. Please help me. Please give me some of whatever it is that makes you complete. I want whatever that wholeness is that you just summoned out of nothing and you put into your work. You were complete in some way that I never was. And I want to know how to be a good person. I want to know how not to hate myself. Please. I'm fading, and all I want is to know that I'm going to be okay. I guess if someone had told me ahead of time that he just really enjoyed making prison games, maybe I wouldn't have thought he was so desperate. I wouldn't have told so many people that he was depressed. Maybe he just likes making prisons. Even now, the disease is telling me to stop. Don't show people what a shitty person you are. They'll hate you. If I knew that my life depended on finding something to be driven by other than validation, what would that even be? It's strange, but the thought of not being driven by external validation is unthinkable. Like, I actually cannot conceive of what that would be like. What now? I think I need to go. And I'm sorry, because I know that I said that I would be here and I would walk you through this, but I'm starting to feel like I have a lot of work to do. I have a lot that I need to make up for, and so I'm just gonna... Okay.
And with Davy's closing thoughts, it's time I finally deliver mine. First off, just in case this wasn't obvious by now, this is a work of fiction. The chances that code exists are slim to none, as has been pointed out by others in detail. The Davy reading we hear in this game is, by extension, a dramatization of real-life Davy reading. I just wanted to point this out before people start jumping to conclusions on real-life Davy, as that is none of our places to judge when we are presented with a character. Following in the footsteps of the Stanley Parable, we are once again presented with an unreliable narrator. To that extent, even I lied at the start when I said this game has no replay value. It technically does, like watching an Edgar Wright film. Each subsequent playthrough has you see things differently now that you have the full picture. It's important to notice that we don't get Goetze's thoughts on these games, ever. We never meet them, or even really learn about them. We only learn who they were to one person. Going back to the game's trailer, it's painfully evident that the character of Davy desperately wants to understand people, see themselves in this grand empath. But they aren't.
Let's say you sit down at a stranger's computer. You start opening up files and looking through stuff, and eventually you come to a folder that just says, My Work. So you open it, and you click on a random file, and it's a video game that looks like this. If you had to guess, what would you say you know about this person right now? Like, maybe they're kinda goofy. Okay, you close that, you scroll down a bit, and you open up a new file. It's another game. Do you think this person is happy? Are they unhappy? Now another one. What do you think is comfortable for this person? What puts them at ease? Do you think they're lonely? What's missing in their life? Keep going, open another file. Let's look at all of them. Let's unpack this person. Are they upset about something or fighting something? What do you think makes this person angry? What kinds of friends do they have? Do they even enjoy making video games at all? Take all of these images, hold them in your mind, and now try to imagine, without ever having met this person, who they are. Okay, let's do it. Let's find out if you're right.
For starters, who's to say that in the Whisper game, the floating sequence was the intended ending? Davey said himself that once Coda was done with the game, he wouldn't talk about it anymore. And this was made before the two ever met. Davey is obsessed with the idea that he understands who Coda is, to the point that when he can't find a reason for something, he assumes it unimportant and skips past it like the maze. The biggest problem, however, stems from that simple piece of dialogue I said was crucial. The argument Davey and Coda had about whether or not a game should be playable. This is, ironically enough, the first major tip that these games have been altered more than you're led to believe. As if Coda argued that not all games should have an end or a goal, why is it that they all do? Why do they have a lamppost at the end? Interestingly enough, the only game that Davey could actually begin to grasp was the backwards game. Yes, this is the part where I get to talk about this. This is the game that most closely defines Davey's argument that a game should have an end and be playable. In Davey's words,
Yep, in this game you can only walk backwards. So it's a short and relatively minimalist experiment combining motion and narrative. It is less advanced than the previous game, but actually it seems to be more focused, more complete. Coda's trying to give it a unique voice rather than simply basing it on a pre-existing trope. It's a short little thought, it says what it wants to say, and then it ends. Didn't need anything more than that. Which to me is why it works, because it gets out quick.
there's also technically no concrete proof that the entering, exiting, and the games in between are connected. It's ironic, because the point I want to make is that I believe that Coda was more interested in making games just for the sake of making them, rather than for a deeper meaning. But yet I've been blabbering about meaning this entire time. I don't necessarily think there is no meaning, but I do believe that these are works that are left up to interpretation. The problem here is that Davey assumed his interpretation was correct, and the only one. For all we know, Coda really did just like making first games with no deeper meaning. I used to draw a lot, and while I gave it up, I did do it long enough to have conversations about my art. Personally, I would have been much happier if someone asked me how I made something, rather than what it meant. Sometimes there was no deeper meaning. I just made something because it came into my head and I wanted to put it out into the world, like this video you're watching. I asked an artist that I know, Frosty Stew, what he would rather be asked. His response was neither. Rather, he would rather be asked why he made something. The point I'm trying to make is that not everything has to have a reason for existing. Sometimes you just want to create weird for weirdness' sake. To wrap up loose ends I promised I'd mention, these are my own interpretations. I know for a fact they aren't the only ones, and I encourage you to play the game and come up with your own. Regarding the prison game, it occurred to me as I was writing the script that I didn't even know if Coda made the telephone game at the end of the prison section. This, like everything else, is up to interpretation, but it sounds like Coda really liked making prisons, whereas Davey desperately wanted Coda to work on something else. For all we know, with Davey being an unreliable narrator, he added this to put an end to the prison saga for himself. I'm basing this on the fact that it's the only prison game to have a lamppost, and the only prison game that Davey actually enjoyed. My last little theory is regarding the game in the theater. I mentioned that in the trailer, this looks different. It could just be that the real Davey doesn't want to show too much of the game to not spoil anything, or you could see it as what the actual game was. The lamppost appears when you're forced to retreat, and the prison bars start to fall. This was likely Davey adding his own twist to spin his understanding of Coda. This is probably too much theorizing for attempting to psychologically profile two fictional people who you are given false information about, but it is food for thought. My closing remarks are that this simple 90-minute experience was very new for me, for reasons that are mind low, and quite frankly, beyond the scope of this video. That might not be the case for everyone, but hey, it takes 1.5 hours to play, so if you don't like it, you can always refund it when you're done, but you'll never know unless you try. I want to thank you for watching some random internet stranger ramble about an almost 10-year-old game. If you enjoyed the game, you might want to consider wishlisting Wonderstall, Davy's new game that comes out March 12th. I'll leave the website for the game in the description if you're interested. If, however, you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing, as I have a lot more things I'd like to discuss in the future.